you could all please rise for the Black National Anthem. You will find the lyrics inside your program. This evening, singing will be Marilyn Keller, accompanied by Daryl Grant.
First, let me thank Marilyn and Daryl for that wonderful musical selection. It's wonderful for us to begin on such a high and uplifting note. So we appreciate you being here with us. My name is Michael Alexander, and I have the privilege of serving as the Interim Director of Global Diversity and Inclusion here at Portland State University. And I would like to begin my comments with a recognition that we are gathered here on occupied lands. I want to honor those who preceded us by offering a land acknowledgement in recognition of the unique and the enduring relationship between tribal communities and the land that we occupy. The Portland metropolitan area rests on traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Cathamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kampua, Moala, and many other tribes and bands. And I ask that we all take a moment to reflect on the land that we are standing on in the tribal nations whose history supports it. Thank you. Our tribute this evening to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King is an annual event for the university, and our keynote will be introduced shortly, but I wanted to take a moment of privilege to say how pleased we are to have Rukaiyah with us tonight. Often when we have the opportunity to meet thought leaders and visionaries, it's evident that their mission and their work has taken them away from their home. And we are so very fortunate here in Portland that she carries her message and her work forward as one of us. I'm thrilled to have her spend this time with us tonight. Global Diversity and Inclusion is pleased to note that this year's Martin Luther King commemoration is a two-day event. Tomorrow evening, we have a panel of thought leaders and activists, and we've asked them to reflect on one of Dr. King's speeches titled The Three Evils of Society: Racism, Poverty, and Militarism. Our distinguished panel will be composed of Doctors Lisa Bates and Marissa Zapata from the College of Urban and Public Affairs, Dr. Tom Hastings from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and moderator Dr. Winston Grady Willis, who is also director of the School of Gender, Race, and Nations. They will be joined by the Reverend Dr. E.D. Mondinane, who is president of the Portland chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. So I hope that you will join us. We will be in this same room, and it will be this same time. Please afford yourself of this two-day commemoration. And now it's my privilege to introduce our president, who will offer a formal welcome. Dr. Ramat Shiraishi started his tenure as president of Portland State University in August of 2017. As president, Ramat has focused on student success by expanding our emphasis on research, private and public partnerships, innovative programs, and philanthropy. Under his leadership, Portland State has launched 2 research centers to help find solutions to homelessness and to make Portland State University and Portland test beds to chart the future of cities. President Shiraishi also is driving a Portland State University co-ops initiative to help students get a jump start on their careers by working at paid positions that will help them pay for college. Prior to assuming the leadership of Portland State, Dr. Shiraishi served at the New York Institute of Technology as provost, vice president, and also as interim president. Dr. Shiraishi held engineering faculty positions at Wayne State, Purdue University, the Colorado School of Mines, and served as dean of the School of Engineering and Computer Science at the University of Denver. He holds master's and doctoral degrees from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. As an Iranian immigrant who moved to the United States to attend college, Dr. Shiraishi was honored in 2018 as recipient of the Ellis Ireland Medal of Honor. He and his wife, Azar, live in Portland. Their daughter, Punar, is a physician in residence at OHSU, and their son, Presmon, is a dermatologist practicing in Nashville. Will you please join me in welcoming our president, Ramad Qureshi.
Thank you, Michael. Good evening. I'm truly honored to welcome you all to tonight's event. Tonight is a tribute to the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This is a special event which unfolds, as Michael mentioned, both tonight and tomorrow, is planned and curated by our Office of Global Diversity and Inclusion and members of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Planning Committee. I want to thank you, Michael, and your staff for everything you have done to make this year's event a special one. I also want to thank for the care and attention that you all put into planning this tribute. So before I go any further, I would like you to join me to thank Michael and students involved and the staff involved in putting together the events of tonight and tomorrow night. One way that the university serves its community is by providing a forum to exchange ideas and to challenge conventional wisdom. I'm grateful that PSU can provide this forum, and I'm grateful to our students for contributing their diverse ideas, cultures, and perspectives to our campus community. As Michael said, I'm a first generation and an immigrant, and I see so much of myself in the eyes of every student at PSU. As you know, 44% of our students are first generation. 43% of them are students of color. We are the most diverse university in the state of Oregon. And this is truly our biggest strength and source of pride for all of us. I want to thank Ms. Rukaiyah Adams. I know how busy she is and how much demand is on her time. We are grateful to you for joining us tonight. I very much look forward to hearing what you have to say about economic inequalities and social change. As Michael mentioned, this is the first of two evening events. And again, I also want, on behalf of Portland State, to invite you to tomorrow night's event also. That event will be happening right here, again, at 6:30. Again, thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us. I hope tonight's discussion leaves you enlightened and inspired. I attended this event last year, and I felt I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot more and get enlightened more tonight. Thank you again. Appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Hamdi Ali, and I'm a senior here at Portland State University. Today I had the honor to spend the day with Rukaiyah Adams, and I also have the privilege to introduce her today. Rukaiyah Adams currently serves as the Chief Investment Officer at Meyer Memorial Trust, one of the largest foundations in Oregon. She is driven at Meyer by the desire to succeed in the capital markets for the benefit of everyday people and the belief that we are all just trying to take care of one another. Rukaiyah grew up in the Walnut Park neighborhood of Northeast Portland. Perhaps like some of you here today, she attended Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School, Harriet Tubman Middle School, and Catlin Gabble School. Rukaiyah holds a BA from Carrollton College with academic distinction from a Juris Doctorate from Stanford Law School, where she served on the Law and Policy Review, and an MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business. She is a member of the Board of Directors of Oregon Public Broadcasting. She is the chair of the Oregon Investment Council, a committee of citizens appointed by the governor to oversee investment of approximately $90 billion to Oregon trust funds, including the Oregon Public Employee Retirement Fund. Rukaiyah's pro bono work includes negotiating on behalf of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, the Homeless Prenatal Project in San Francisco, and the National Children's Defense Fund. Her proudest moments as a lawyer was serving as voter rights advocate in Ohio on Election Day in 2008 with Counselor for Change. Following a musical production by Marilyn Keller and Dale Grant, the next voice you'll be hearing is that of our keynote speaker, Rukaiyah Adams. As a part of her tribute to Dr. King and his work, she is donating her fee for tonight's address to Right to Dream 2, a nonprofit dedicated to providing a refuge for members of Portland unhoused communities. Thank you.
Destiny brought us to this day, and we shall not be denied. To my people everywhere, may you know the truth that survives above the lies. Though the path is a long one, history provides some words to fortify. We are bold, we are wise, up from a past that's rooted in pain. Guided by the Almighty, God has heard our cry. The blessed day is come, and justice will be satisfied. We rise, we rise. we rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, like hope springing high, still I'll rise. Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise. I rise. I rise. Rise up, brand new day. You know that love will find a way. Oh, rise up, brand new day. You know that love will find a way. Rise up, brand new day. You know that love will find a way. Rise up, brand new day. You know that love will find a way. We rise.
Let's please give another warm Portland State welcome to our distinguished keynote speaker, Rukaiyah Adams.
In the 50 years since Dr. King was assassinated, it seems like so much has changed. We do things our grandparents could only dream of. We have eliminated diseases we thought were incurable, including the measles, we thought. We have rockets that can land on the moon. We can watch almost any movie at any time. We have songs. Most of you have Dr. King's entire speech catalog in the palm of your hands. And despite the magnitude of change, old problems persist, and in some cases, they're getting worse. The rent is too damn high. Ever more of our neighbors have no permanent housing. Folks working full-time and sometimes multiple jobs cannot support their families. People are intentionally disenfranchised from our political system. The tangled relationship between oppression and our economy, the economic highway to power, as Dr. King put it, has caused a level of inequality that is affecting us all. That's why Dr. King's messages resonate today in the same way that they did 5 decades ago. In 1968, the poverty rate was 13%. At that time, that translated into about 25 million people living in poverty. In 2011, that number was 15%. It translated to 46 million people living in poverty. And it's not who you might think. The largest chunk of that is actually white folks. The second largest group are Latinos, followed by African Americans, but in relative terms, the largest groups are Native Americans and Alaska Natives. Another indicator that conditions are still very challenging for some, the top 1%, they've become even tip-toppier. Nationally, in 1968, the top 1% took home about 11% of all income. By 2017, that number had doubled to 22%. And it's not very different in Oregon. In 1968, the top 1% took home 8%. This year, it was 16.6%. That's more than twice what it was in 1968, when Dr. King thought we were living in an unequal society. To read Dr. King's structural analysis of race, economics, and war, and the solutions he offered, is to read a wholly accurate state of our world in 2018. In an early article penned by him in 1956, Dr. King attempted to frame the Montgomery bus boycott, and he stated it bluntly: economics are a part of our struggle. Then in 1957, Dr. King wrote, "Another thing we must do is invest our finances in the cause of freedom. Freedom has never been cheap. It is expensive. And we must never spend our money for more evanescent and ephemeral than for eternal values of freedom and justice." You see, Dr. King was forming radical ideas about economic bondage from the very beginning of his leadership journey. In hearing these powerful messages, I couldn't help but wonder, what could a homegirl from around the way with the love of numbers do to help us see Dr. King's messages, his work, with new eyes? As I dove into the research, I realized that we have so watered down his messages, particularly messages about economic inequality, that our tributes are not entirely honest, even if they are factual. Have you ever heard a description of Dr. King that was so polite and so vague that it verged on meaningless? Right? People say things like, he was an American Baptist minister who became a visible leader in the civil rights movement. What? Another one that I found was that Dr. King was best known for advancing nonviolence and civil disobedience, and I just thought, what are they talking about? Do these phrases in any way capture Dr. King, the political activist, Dr. King, the labor organizer, Dr. King, the prominent proponent of a guaranteed income? No, they do not. And the truth here is that Dr. King was a black man living in a deeply segregated country who promoted socialist ideas and opposed war. He stood for those things in an era when just boarding a bus could land you in jail, and for a black man, a sideways glance could get you killed. Honestly, we even take that part of Dr. King's story away from him. In our polite descriptions of the end of his life, we say that he gave his life to the cause. He did not give his life. He was murdered. And Dr. King deserves better. So tonight, let's honor him and the ultimate sacrifice that he paid by shining a light not only on what he lived for, his dreams, his most aspirational and unifying statements. Let's not just honor those things, but let's talk about what he was willing to die for. You feel me? Can we do that tonight? You guys don't have to be so quiet, by the way. I promise I'm not going anywhere. And what was he talking about at the end of his life? He was talking about economic inequality. A few things have become clear to me in understanding Dr. King's message on the topic. First, based on his message, social injustice in America is economic inequality. What I mean is that people often view injustice and economic inequality as two separate issues. They are not separate issues. That leads me to my second point. What is measured helps us understand what to focus on, and what we focus on has the power to transform. Based on what I see, we are recreating a centuries-old economic system that favors one group above all others. You remember that 1% number. We'll circle back to that later. The third point I'd like to make is one about responsibility, more specifically about our permanence in this nation, mine and yours. Wealth and income gaps have continued to accelerate. In addition to that 46 or so million people who live below the poverty line, nearly 140 million people are either poor or low income in this country. That's half of the population. Looking at this from the upstream perspective, the 400 wealthiest Americans now own more wealth than the bottom 64%. 400 people own more wealth than 204 million of us. This means, as a society, we are moving in entirely the wrong direction. All of us must stake claim to America. We have to do as Dr. King did and root ourselves in this place. We cannot allow disparities to worsen. Not now, not in the future, not on our watch. before I dive in, I first want to say you don't have to be so quiet. You guys are still, you're making me nervous. I know there are some black folks in here. I see you in here, right? I hope I can get an amen or a clap or something. Can we make some noise? All right, first you don't have to be so quiet. We got to lift the energy in the room. This is heavy talk, but look, we've survived, so it's going to be okay. The end of the story is all right. Before I get any further, though, I'd like to thank all of the students in the room for engaging your minds in the work of justice. I also want to recognize the Office of Global Diversity and Inclusion for inviting me. In particular, I want to thank the MLK Tribute Committee and Dr. Lisa Grady Willis, who made this work so easy. Thank you, Dr. Grady Willis. Appreciate it. Thank you. And President Shureshi and the Board of Trustees here at PSU, I want to thank you for stewarding a world-class university in downtown Portland and for acknowledging Dr. King's monumental contributions to this country. I'm honored to be a part of this MLK tribute. Professionally, I'm an investor for the people. And in that role, I make profit from money. And in order to do that, I look at a lot of data. I see demographic compilations, I see earnings information, I see tax trends, data on consumer preferences, I see budgets, I see forecasts, and I see them all at a very high level. This means that I can't see individual people, I can't focus on one single unit. Instead, for me, it's cumulated to millions of people, thousands of businesses, data on whole governments, whole nations. In fact, in some ways, I see data on whole continents. In the accumulation of this data, I spot trends that are important to investing so that I can see them and exploit them and make money on them before everybody else can. For example, when most people hear about the crushing debt that young people accumulate to go to college, they focus on the individual person because that's what a reasonable, normal person would do, is look at the person and think about their individual debt. But for someone like me who looks at large data sets, I hear about one student's debt and I immediately think, what about the other millions of students who are in a similar situation? How much do they hold together? Who's lending them that money? Are we charging them extraordinary rates of interest? Are we ripping off the kids? And how does yes, we are. I hear that. All right. I like that spirit. And then I think, how is that going to affect our economy long term? For me, a single observation can roll up into an understanding of trends that are driving our society. Here's the catch. Once the data is accumulated, the information isn't just a trend. It starts to reveal some form of truth. And not the kind of truth that's apparent from the surface, but the kind that we often deny, the kind we avoid, the kind we ignore. And that's important because if politics today have taught us anything, it's the importance of distinguishing between what people say is true and what is actually true. You hear me? Right. This ability to discern truth from large data sets is a kind of superpower, right? And superpowers are awesome, but like I said, I'm a homegirl from around the way. And as a homegirl, I bring my whole self, my black woman self, to the work. And for black women, it is not enough to discern truth from data. We have to be strong enough to listen honestly to what the numbers tell us. We have to be bold enough to speak the truth openly when we see it. And we have to be experienced enough to go beyond technical language. We have to be able to talk about the meaning of trends in plain English so that things can change. Tonight I'm going to give it a try. In thinking about Dr. King's legacy, I looked at reams of numbers and I came across a few seminal milestones. Let's begin with the numbers 90 and 50. The first is Dr. King's 90th birthday. The second is the 50th anniversary of his assassination, which we marked last year with a walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. And then there's another number, an even more tragic number, 400. It's the 400th anniversary of the start of slavery in North America. The jarring collision of commemorating in 1 year Dr. King's assassination and the 400th anniversary of slavery in North America rocked me back in my heels. And although it's commonly understood that it was the conditions of slavery that led to the Jim Crow South, that in turn led to the inequality in American society that fueled Dr. King's work, the two, slavery and today's economic inequality, are not often explicitly linked. And the coincidence of these milestones sensitized me to the connection between Dr. King's work, his message, and the residue of slavery. So when I turned quantitative in the research, the evolution of Dr. King's work became clear to me. He began trying to advance our rights with moral arguments about our humanity. He did that by promoting nonviolence in the face of unspeakable actual violence. Next, he moved to legal arguments for citizenship and equal protection under the law. He did that by engaging political leaders and invoking the text of our own Constitution as a rebuke to their hypocrisy. He finally pivoted to the future of civil rights, and that future was defined by economic issues like affordable housing, like equal access to education, and labor issues, particularly issues related to fair and equal pay. Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference organized the Poor People's Campaign in 1968. That was the work he was doing that led to his death. To give you a sense of the inequality in 1968, in addition to the 25 million people living in poverty, in 1968, the Fair Housing Act, which was supposed to prevent discrimination in housing, was enacted. It didn't. African Americans had lower home ownership levels, and they were renters. In 1968, the black household income was about $25,000 a year versus a white family income that was about $45,000 a year. In 1968, approximately 30% of black students graduated from high school. Here's another interesting topic from 1968. The top regular tax bracket was 75%. The top capital gains bracket was nearly 27%. Corporate taxes were about 53%. So when you think that times were hard in Dr. King's time in 1968, you know what the numbers are today. We've been hearing them being debated in DC. 75% was the top income tax rate. So that spring, Dr. King traveled the country to assemble a multiracial army of the poor. His vision was that they would march on Washington in a nonviolent civil disobedience campaign to pressure Congress to create an economic Bill of Rights. The focus on the poor was frankly not well received in the civil rights movement. Dr. King lost the support of a lot of his longtime allies because they thought that the Poor People's Campaign was too broad, that its demands were unrealizable, and that it would accelerate a backlash and repression against black people, not poor white folks. They were not feeling it. But Dr. King, he kept at it. Throughout March and April of that same year, the year he was murdered, he went to Memphis, Tennessee, in support of black sanitation workers who had been on strike for better wages and humane treatment. They were on strike because several of those workers had been crushed to death in garbage trucks. But city officials didn't seem to care. At this strike, black men carried the signs you've probably seen that read, "I am a man." Those signs captured the painful, dehumanizing sentiment of Dr. King's work. It was in Memphis that Dr. King delivered his well-known mountaintop speech. He said, "We must always anchor our external direct action with the power of economic withdrawal." He went further and told people to boycott businesses like Coca-Cola and Wonder Bread that discriminated against black folks. Now you know it was getting serious when people boycotted Wonder Bread. In this way, Dr. King forged an ironclad connection between a social issue on one hand, specifically recognizing the humanity of the sanitation workers, and an economic one on the other hand, based on equal pay and benefits. It was this kind of radical talk that changed Dr. King from being an interesting, charming minister to being dangerous. But that was also Dr. King's breakthrough. Social injustice is economic inequality. Put another way, economic inequality is a measure of injustice. From my perspective, and after many years of seeing how wealth is transferred, how wealth is taken, how wealth is hoarded, I take Dr. King's conclusion one step further, that wealth inequities in America are the cumulative measure of generations of injustice. They are the measure of our problems. Those problems, though, they help us understand what to focus on. I've asked myself time and time again, what might we focus on to continue Dr. King's work? And my answer often circles back to that number, 400. And that line of inquiry, pivoting toward understanding Dr. King's take on slavery, I realized that there was this economic underpinning there. Now stay with me on this. Although it takes some work, I can name racism, I can hold the pain of my people's history, while at the same time stripping away my emotional and social filters about slavery. And when I do that, I'm able to see slavery as an economic system, a system of structural wealth stealing. An economic system that was built on labor exploitation. An economic system that was intentionally undereducating workers to ensure that they and their offspring for many generations could be exploited. I could see it as an economic system that shortened people's lives because they were either worked to death or died relatively young for poor health. It was an economic system that destabilized families by separating parents from children. It was an economic system, more than anything else, that terrorized people ostensibly to enforce law and order. Yes. Those 5 characteristics, intentional undereducation, labor exploitation, shortened lifespans, destabilized families, and tyrannical policing, although they sound like social issues, they continue to be major drivers of economic inequality to this day. Let's talk about why. Starting with the easiest, education. Ours is a system that undereducates people. We've made higher education a personal cost rather than a public asset. As a result, workers in this system, when you accumulate them up to the macro level, they cannot optimize their pay. It's very difficult for them to negotiate on their own behalf without union support. Undereducating people is a way of extracting wealth from them. Next, there's labor. The cumulative effect of a lifetime of getting stiffed on pay because of the color of your skin is a diminishment of wealth. Underpaying black people or women or immigrants or anybody is a way of transferring wealth from the worker to someone else. And the consequence isn't just for that worker, because we know that what you save over the course of a lifetime is passed on to the next generation. So you're impacting several generations by stiffing people on pay. The Memphis sanitation workers' signs that read, "I am a man," could just as well have said, "Stop stealing my wealth," right? Then there's shorter lifespans. The shorter your lifespan, particularly if you make a living from physical labor, the less you can work means the less that you can save, and the less you can accumulate for your family. So any labor or community conditions that lead to earlier death from work, stress, bad health care, or all of them combined, impact intergenerational wealth. So too do conditions that destabilize families. The sale of people, the separation of parents from their children in the prime of their working lives, preventing them from pooling and saving resources. All of these elements are intentional, are part of an intentional system to steal wealth from workers and deliver it to owners. And finally, subjecting people to the stress of arbitrary, unjustifiable violence is a transfer of wealth, not just because it also directly causes the death of some people, and we know who those some people have been in policing, but more because public safety, the real purpose of policing, is a form of commonwealth. Let me repeat that. Public safety is a form of commonwealth. We are supposed to share it. It's like our constitutional rights. Therefore, not getting your fair share of the commonwealth of public safety is a transfer of a public good from those who are terrorized to those whose interests are irrationally overprotected. These 5 social issues, education, labor, longevity, family stability, public safety, they were pillars of a long-gone slave economy, but they remain the main drivers of economic inequality today. Dr. King called it economic bondage. I'll put a sharper point on it. We have recreated the economic structure of slavery without the moral stain of actually owning people. All right, we're in church now. And although African Americans continue to carry the heaviest burden in this new slave economy, we are not the only ones under the yoke now. How is this true? Education. We know there are extreme disparities in resources, outcomes. We know that this continues on a massive scale. In this way, we are replicating the first component of a slave economy by intentionally and systematically undereducating people. Next, there's labor. Despite the fact that women make up almost 47% of the United States workforce, we know that women are paid less for equal work. The gender pay gap for the average woman equates to losing nearly $530,000 of wealth over the course of their working lives. And for PSU graduates, that number jumps to $800,000. These numbers don't even include compounding interest, and they certainly do not reflect differences by race. And we know if they did, that Latinas and Native American women would have even greater disparities. We know that a disproportionate number of Black households are led by women. So we're structurally transferring wealth away from those families, away from those children when we accept gender pay gaps. And let's look at the whole Black family. Black median wages, men and women together, are about 75% of white wages. But Black median income is only 60% of white median income. And when you add up the cumulative impact of lower wages and income, Black family net worth is less than 10% of white family net worth.
Actually, it's 6.
There you go. I love that. Thank you. And if you layer on the analysis for Black women-led households with student debt, Black family net worth is a negative number. We continue to do this on a massive scale, replicating another component of the slave economy. The third point is death rates. For many, the consequence of stress, the lack of health care coupled with unhealthy food systems is higher death rates. The aggregate effect of higher death rates, particularly among men of color, is a way to transfer wealth from them and their families to others. We know that African Americans are 50% more likely to have high blood pressure that can be a major issue to mortality. We know that the homicide rates for many young Black men are 9 times as high as their white peers. We know that we should not conflate lifespan with death rates, yet we still do it on a massive scale, thus replicating the third component of the new slave economy. Number 4, family stability. let's talk about our jails. Large-scale imprisonment, including the destabilizing madness that's happening with immigrant detentions on the southern border, is a structural mechanism for taking wealth away from the detained and the incarcerated and delivering it to the profit-driven prison industrial complex. Over the course of a lifetime, the wealth taking is staggering. In 1968, there were 94 prisoners per 100,000 people in the United States. By 2014, that number was 5 times higher. That's 1.5 million people. And those numbers don't even include the border detentions. But to give you a sense of why this is important, we often focus on the cost of incarcerating people. But here's the back of the envelope estimate of how much annual income the families of incarcerated people lose. At 1.5 million inmates at an average salary of about $40,000 per year, that's $60 billion of income, of foregone income, every year. Even if those folks only saved 1% of their income, that's a whopping $600 million a year of foregone savings. We know this is a problem. Yet again, we continue to allow it on a massive scale, thus replicating the fourth component of the slave economy. Number 5, public safety. As I mentioned earlier, one way to think about policing is to characterize public safety as a commonwealth, equally shared by all. In that regard, the exclamation that Black Lives Matter is also an economic outcry, right? It's an economic outcry. It's a way of saying, hey, yo, we pay for policing too. We want our fair share of safety, right? We know the framework for policing needs a reboot. You know the system for policing needs a reboot, yet we continue to allow violence and terror on a massive scale, thus replicating the 5th component of the new slave economy. Look, you don't need me to lecture you on these issues. You see the evidence around you all the time. The homelessness, police brutality, children seeking asylum taken from parents, gross pay differences, students graduating from college with massive debt because we know education is a public good. We've privatized the cost. I understand that this reality, this economic bondage, is more recent for some. But this is an old story for a lot of us. In the Poor People's Campaign, and in his ability to connect injustice with economic inequality, Dr. King, he saw this coming. He was not trying to sanitize social issues by framing them as economic, nor am I. We are not backing off of calling out racism and its pernicious residue. On the contrary, by acknowledging social issues, we can see how they are in fact the very drivers of economic inequality. These 5 elements of the new slave economy are the backbone of structural and exploitative economic systems that we thought we had defeated, that we thought we had torn down when slavery ended, when Jim Crow ended, when Dr. King dreamed, when President Obama was elected. We thought, but we haven't. We cannot allow the slave economy to reform. There's too much at stake, not only for Black people, but for so many others. Today's exploitative economic system now includes immigrants. It includes poor folks, includes white folks. It includes our indigenous brothers and sisters. At this point, it includes all of us. And if it isn't clear to the young people at PSU, we have to finish Dr. King's work, because we don't got next. We got now, right now. Right. So, how do we confront economic inequality? The policy answers are clear. They're not that different than Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign. 1, mandate equal pay for equal work for everyone. 2, defend the Affordable Care Act. 3, reevaluate whether housing should be an investment asset. 4, stop the carceral state from separating people from their families with no evidence of positive outcomes. 5, come to consensus about the purpose of policing, to move from a law and order-based framework for the benefit of overseers and owners to a framework that ensures safety for everyone. And the last thing is that we just have to eliminate disparities in education. That begins with thinking of all education as a common good, and that we'll have to fund it from preschool through college, even if that means paying higher taxes. These are not progressive policies. These are not conservative policies. They're practical policies. They're humane policies that are meant to ensure the long-term stability of our society and promote our common wealth. But even as I share them with you now, I don't think this is what Dr. King would say is the single most important thing that any one of us must do. Because even though they make sense, they're policies driven by institutions, and institutions won't change unless people make them change. Let us pay tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the man, his message, by finishing his work, by ending economic bondage. I said earlier that I see cumulative data, not individualized data. In this talk, in some ways, I've made an exception for Dr. King. But as with data, when you accumulate his speeches, his sermons, his interviews, his testimonies, his protests, his action, the truth emerges. In particular, truth emerges about how he fended off being regarded as something other than American. How in his soaring rhetoric and bravery, he did something very straightforward. He showed us how to be immovable, how to resist othering, how to be permanent. Dr. King was not just in this place. He was not just in this America. He was of its history. He was of its constitution. He was of its economy. He is permanent for all of us. This way, his lesson in permanence engages the American patriotic spirit, and it's perfectly illustrated by a markup of his oft-quoted statement by one of his contemporaries, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Dr. King wrote, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice." Ruth Bader Ginsburg added, "Yeah, it's true. The moral arc of the universe is long, and it bends toward justice, but only if there's steadfast commitment to see the task through." And perhaps that is Dr. King's most intimate message to us. And it's just taken us 50 years plus a little help from RBG to understand it. That the ownership of our past, albeit terrible, and our passionate connection to a more equal future must be evident in our resolve today. We must see this task through. Seeing it through means that we cannot abstain from voting. On the contrary, we have to inspire armies of people to cast their ballots across the nation. We cannot look away from homelessness. We cannot accept poor graduation rates. We cannot give in to cynicism and apathy and indifference. Instead, we must roll up our sleeves and tackle them head on. We must be permanent. We have to do that because change doesn't happen on its own. It's up to us who survived slavery, us natives, us immigrants, all of us. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not leaving yet, y'all.
No, she definitely is not leaving. So at this time, we will have volunteers coming around with mics for the audience to ask questions. Please raise your hand or stand if you are able, and please be brief. We have lots of questions. We're going to start on your right side of the room.
Oh, wow. First one. Thank you for a great presentation, and I'm sorry I yelled out the 6%. My name is Charles Fong. I am a member of the Portland NAACP, and you'll be hearing from our president tomorrow. On January the 7th of this year, a group of community advocates made a presentation to Joanne Hardesty, our first African-American city commissioner. All right, thank you. And it was exactly about the statistic that I kind of interrupted you with.
No, it's okay. My numbers were as of 2011. I think yours are more recent.
Well, it's 10 cents to the dollar before the Great Recession, and now it's 6 cents to the dollar, and that's based on the Pew research. So It's pretty, I'm a data scientist like you, except I didn't make it to Stanford. I'm not smart enough. So,
but you also didn't have the debt, so even Stephen, you're smart enough.
All right,
to avoid
fair enough, fair enough. Okay, so this is an active conversation that the Portland NAACP as well as other advocates are having with the State of Oregon Housing Agency. Obama sent us about $315 million in the Hardest Hit Fund. About 90% of that's been distributed, but it's been disproportionate. Communities of color have gotten about $1 out of every $14. So we're reaching out to you and to anybody else here who wants to help us in terms of building on the advocacy that we started with Joanne Hardesty on the 7th of January. And I would appreciate any recommendations you have for us to fight for this money for community of color. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fong. That was one of the easiest questions I've ever answered.
Rukaiyah, would you like to take your lovely chair and your mic and get comfortable?
Sure.
I feel like we
Wow.
have. You might as well.
Rukaiyah, my name is Marilyn Keller. You know that.
Yes.
I am a member of the advisory committee for Lift Every Voice Oregon. We just held a rally last night at my church, Augustana Lutheran Church. We are promoting the two bills that are in the legislature right now to ban the sale of of assault weaponry and also for high capacity magazines. And we are definitely on the same plane of social and human justice is the same as civil rights and human rights. Can you say what quantitative methods we could use to gain the physical aspect of building our campaign and support, and also if the Meyer Trust would be would be involved in something like that? I know it's political right now,
right,
but we're going past that. It's going to become law, and we will be moving into civil and economic justice issues in the future. Do you have any sort of roads for us to take to get there?
Well, thank you for that question, Marilyn. It's a difficult one. I'll start with the second part of it, which is that my job is to make the money. I don't get to give it away, unfortunately, but happy to have a conversation offline about that. A few things come to mind in trying to quantify or to make quantitative arguments against high-capacity weapons for retail sale. The first is purpose, right? Utility. The second is I'm sure we have some data about the impact to human life, and I would estimate for people who've been harmed by high-capacity weapons, what the diminishment in their lifetime earnings would be and all of the costs for supporting them. So sometimes we don't think about the actual numeric costs of it. So that's one thing that comes to mind. The other thing would be the kind of stress and preparation that schools now have to prepare for people potentially walking into their schools and shooting. There's all of the training that goes with that, the time that goes with it, estimating the preparation, the cost for preparing for unspeakable violence. I think that number would be pretty staggering. Let's say that every school in the country spends half a day preparing for that, and they pay facilitators, they need special equipment, all of that stuff accumulated, my hunch would be tens of millions of dollars, even for a state like Oregon. So those are the things that come to mind, but I'm happy to think a little bit more about how to frame it from a quantitative standpoint. I don't know where the feedback's coming from. I'm sorry.
Pull the mic a little bit closer.
Oh, okay, yeah. And the other data scientist, Mr. Fong, now I'm not going to forget your name. You have any other ideas about how they might frame this response to? Thanks. That's Stanford student debt. So I'm paying off.
Rukaiyah, first of all, I want to thank you again for being at Portland State today and for spending some time with my students earlier today.
Absolutely.
My question is kind of a double question. First of all, I'm wondering if you consider climate injustice to be one of the drivers of economic bondage. And secondly, I wonder about your thoughts regarding the new Poor People's Campaign.
Yeah, so the MLK Global Initiative, which is a 50-year renewal of Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign, added 2 elements to the campaign other than the 5 that I talked about. They added climate justice to the Poor People's Campaign. So absolutely, I believe that it's an element of the extraction of wealth from, particularly from communities of color. We know there are higher incidents of asthma and breathing-based lifelong challenges as a result of proximity to freeways, for example. In some communities, proximity to waste dumps and other environmental, I'm going to try to be diplomatic, to environmental situations that we know are not good for human health. We know that those are issues. And again, when the result is impaired lifespan, higher healthcare needs, death, unsafe streets for kids to cross, sometimes in parts of Far East County, Portland, where there aren't sidewalks and cars are zipping through there. That's a form of wealth stealing. That stress, the threat of death. So I absolutely think climate action is a part of the justice movement, and I think the MLK Global Initiative pretty expressly stated that. What was the second question again? Oh yes, it's really amazing. So I recommend everyone going to read MLK Global Initiative. I think that's the URL for the site, but they basically have reignited Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign, and like I mentioned, his policy suggestions from 1968 are pretty much exactly what we have to do today. They really haven't changed that much with the addition of climate justice and some nuance in policing. I think they've added one more there.
Hi, Rukaiyah. It's John Washington.
Hi, Mr. Washington.
You know, Rukaiyah, I was listening to you. I tell you, you're deep. You know, you was cooking with grease up there, girl. Let me tell you. I was trying to hang on, you know, and follow you all the way there, you know, because, you know, us Rutgers University people, you know, we dense, you know, a little bit, you know. You know, I heard the broader picture. But can you sort of dial me down into what we do every day right here in our own community to address our apathy, you know, and some of the things that we be dealing with in our communities? So can you show me or suggest what would be like something we should wake up and do every morning to make that contribution?
So I tell you, the thing that jumps out at me as being doable is closing the education disparities. I think that is doable. So I have some folks, including Mr. Tony Hobson, who helped lead the transformation of graduation rates at Jefferson High School. So I think that scaling up that work to a statewide strategy is something that we can do, that we can write the replication strategy for it. The other thing, Mr. Washington, I think we actually could do is to have education designated a common good here. And we will say that we'll fully fund education pre-K through college, and that will be the first thing that we cover in our budgets, and that everything else has to work around that. So to me, that, like, and I say that as the village spinster with no children, right? I still think our biggest economic issue is education funding equitably, particularly higher education. We cannot continue to spit out young adults with huge debt burdens because they start from in a wealth position that's a negative number, right? They come out of the gates and drop down, $20,000, $40,000, $50,000. It's very difficult for them to pull themselves out. Now I want to call out the baby boomers in the room, because the way that education doesn't get funding is because it doesn't have the support of that age group. And we've got to get people in that generation to be willing to pay more taxes to fully fund an education system. To me, that's the thing we have to do.
Good evening, Ms. Adams. Thank you for coming over here. My name is Loomis Hilaire. I'm a PhD candidate in civil and environmental engineering here at Portland State. And when you were talking about sanitizing King, one of the speeches I remembered was the Beyond Vietnam, 1967, from the Riverside Church. That's very rarely heard. And I want you to, can you speak a little bit about the role of militarism in constant wars and how that affects structural inequalities?
Gosh, oh my God. You want to come up here? Why don't you come up here and talk to me about that? Because I want to hear some more. That question is so broad. I think the militarism issue, so come on up here. You're too far away. Let's have a conversation. Do we have any other microphones? Can you give them that one? Let's have a conversation.
Well, when I was listening to the speech, Dr. King was talking about how if you're spending money on Vietnam and fighting the Viet Cong, that's less money for social programs, right. For any contrast with like how, the priorities basically of a country. Like right. We're spending all this money to defeat the Viet Cong, and then he talked about how immoral it was, but then also the social cost of like, the more money you spend there, the less money you can spend feeding people, educating people, doing the things that uplift society. Can you talk about like how they, like, do you see similar same things going on today? Even at a larger scale. I mean, I'm sure there's an academic in the room who can tell us exactly how much we spend on our war machine, but my guess is it's in the several trillions of dollars per year. And so when we ask, can we afford education? The answer is yes, if we stop feeding the war machine. And that's the bottom line. But the issue with war, I think from an economic standpoint, is that people think of the cost and the wealth transfer in war as going somewhere else. That the war fought in Vietnam, all that wealth went to Vietnam, or the wars that we fight in the Middle East are going to the Middle East. Well, a lot of the military-industrial complex are American business people, and so we're taking taxpayer commonwealth and transferring it to the people who make the helicopters and who produce, satellite systems. So it's not actually that the people fighting the war or the destination of the war is where all that capital goes, right? It goes to corporations at this point. So in my view, that we should be very thoughtful about transferring commonwealth into the war machine if it doesn't have a global
purpose or benefit. But you often hear talk about war really very thinly veiled as a transfer of wealth. So Dr. King's perspective on that, I think, is even more true today, that we've scaled up that spending. My guess would be 10 times more than it was in 1968.
Thank
right?
you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hi, this is Rukaiyah. This is Daryl. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the point that you made about housing and sort of, I can't remember the exact wording of it, but taking that out of one of the 5 points that you make,
right.
Taking housing out of the capital sort of, or wealth building system.
Right, so we often have the discussion about housing and renters, and it's framed in ways where we say, well, we want to control rent escalation. We want to put a cap on how much rents can increase. Or during the great financial crisis, we heard about all of the foreclosures that pushed folks out of their homes. But the underpinning of all of that economic impact is that we think of housing as an investment asset. We categorize it in ways similar to stocks and bonds. And if you have an asset that you've invested in and you expect it to perform like a stock or bond, you're going to extract as much cash flow out of the asset as possible. So in financializing housing, what we've done is create this tremendous pressure on the housing stock to produce high levels of cash flow that are as high as equities. And as long as we financialize housing and we invest in it as if it were an equity, we're going to continue to have pressure on housing for populations of color, for low and middle income people. So one of my thoughts about how we change that is that we begin to think of housing more like a bond and less like an equity, so that people who own it get a steady but not escalating value out of it, instead of having people being able to really extract wealth from renters and deliver it to owners. Now that's a crazy idea, but I think that continuing the financialization of our housing stock will cause profound destabilizing effects in our society. So I'm just noodling on that. Just noodling on it.
Hi, Rukaiyah. Walter, your uncle.
Hi, Uncle Walter.
I want to clear up the question that the gentleman asked about Vietnam. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I served 2 tours of Vietnam, United States Navy. And I'm going to clear this up right now, that the money that was spent in Vietnam was about what the manufacturers in this country had built up, and they needed a place to test it with, including the drug manufacturers and all, electronics, automobile, everybody, guns. That's what it was all about. Okay? And now, one other question I have for you, why is it in education, such as Portland State University, University of Oregon, and Oregon State, state universities are quicker to raise their tuition than private universities?
Ooh, that's a good one. Next time you have to ask the hard questions in private, Uncle Walter. So I don't think we can fully fund education without education institutions also transforming. When I invest in a corporation, I want to know, when I buy their bonds, I want to know how they're going to use the money. Will it be used well? Do you have responsible managers? Do you have a competent executive team? Will the capital invested produce the results that we all want in growing our common wealth as investors in that business? Well, I think universities and colleges have to have the same level of transparency, financial transparency, and excellence in management. So in order to get taxpayers to fully fund pre-K through college, that means that college presidents and CFOs are going to have to make the case for why those dollars are efficiently used and we don't have a ratchet up of cost being transferred to students, right? We'll have to justify our sports programs. We'll have to justify the output of professors. We'll have to justify the value of new buildings. We'll have to justify some of our more expensive and favorite programs. So I think education will transform. When full funding is an option, I think we'll all have higher expectations for controlling escalating costs. But by saying, though, that I want to fully fund education, if tuition goes up and it's fully funded, it's not transferred to the individual student. And if it's not transferred to the individual student, then the system clamps down on mismanagement much more effectively. So the problem with the way that we fund it is that we socialize the benefit of education and we privatize the cost, right? And so we either need to privatize the business, the benefit entirely, or socialize the cost entirely, but we've crossed those two wires and it's not working. So if we fully fund education, the concept of tuition increases that are the responsibility of the student individually would go away. But there's one more thing about funding education fully. As a taxpayer and a childless middle-aged lady, I would have expectations of college graduates as well, right? I would expect you to vote, right? I hope you'd stay in the state. I would expect you to serve young people who are trying to come up as well. So I think the transformation of full funding might create a transformation in the entire system. Yeah. And Uncle Walter, I know if I didn't answer that adequately, you're going to catch me afterward.
Hi. Hi.
Hey.
Hi, my name is Alpin Sheth. Thank you for the talk. Your framing of the 5 pillars of this system of this new system, or this revised system of a slave economy, is really powerful. And although I agree with and I believe what you're saying as far as the need for tax revenue-based investment in all these different areas, what I wanted to ask you is, so I come from the fintech sector. I want to ask you, what are the things you think are strategic ways to complement any potential increase in tax revenue and substantial public investment with advances in technology and the new forms of, whether it's like algorithms or whatever it is, in investment, given the velocity of wealth accumulation that we're up against?
Right.
Right.
Wow.
So there's like a substantial, we're coming from extreme deficit as far as our strategies for accumulating or at least redistributing wealth. Do you see ways we can leverage technology and financial investment to match that or to surpass that, so we can actually catch up, essentially?
Right. So I'm not sure, but I hope so. And I tell you, a few things come to mind based on your comments. Thank you. They were wonderful, and you allowed me to step through the door to the present, not just 1968. So technology, I think, will both help and undermine how we deal with the new slave economy. So data is labor now. All these kids in here with their phones in their pockets that are monitoring where they go every day, and all the women keeping track of their menstrual cycles on those apps. That data is going somewhere and someone is monetizing it. So data is the new labor. And I think that we have to enact laws to protect that, or to have the value of it either inure to the benefit of the individual or to the commonwealth. That we can't keep letting entrepreneurs take our labor in the form of data and then monetize it and sell it back to us. Although we do that with recycling and compost, but that's a whole other story. But so in that way, I think data, it will put pressure on us and probably exacerbate some of the wealth inequities. For example, a lot of the social media companies in Silicon Valley, vast wealth was accumulated with relatively few workers. I mean, the wealth that Mark Zuckerberg has accumulated compared to the people who built railroads or telecom systems 100 years before that needed lots and lots and lots of people to extract, wealth from in order to build, he just doesn't need, they don't need that many people because they're using all of us to steal our wealth in the form of data. So that's the downside. The upside, I think, is one of your points is getting at a really hard question that we think we all share a value on, but we don't really. The question is, what is equality? Right? Is equality redistributive, or is it something else? And this is an area that I've been really working on. My husband reads these really hard things and then helps me understand them. And one of the things I've been reading recently is the work of a philosopher named Elizabeth Alexander. And she believes there are two different frameworks for thinking about equality. One is redistributive and one is relational. The relational one says, instead of trying to take tax dollars and redistribute them so that wealth is more equitably shared through a tax structure, why don't we say we'll allocate our collective resources to build things that are in our common wealth? Parks, education systems, clean air, river systems. So I think if we veer in the direction of relational equality, not redistributive equality, then I think technology really can drive us toward understanding, measuring, and moving capital to high impact areas that are driving relational commonwealth. So in that way, I think for sure it will be, and we are certainly seeing it in science, basic science. For example, in Oregon, our river, the Willamette River, something like 70% of our economy is connected to the river, one way or another. And so the health of the river and whatever technology and environmental advances we need to throw at it to keep it vital is important for our economy to remain vital. So in that way, I think technology will definitely drive relational commonwealth. But your question is hard. I would love for you to invite me back after I've had more time to think about it, except to say that I also think that technology will allow this generation of leaders to organize more efficiently, to share money more efficiently, to be menacing without actually being physical. So I think in that way it also will drive some transformation.
Hello.
I hope someone's keeping track of time. Are we over time? Okay.
All right, I'll be quick. My name is Patricia Hunt, and I was invited to this occasion by my daughter, Roberta Hunt. She's an associate professor here at the university. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and I'll tell you why I'm telling you that. My background is 28 years of professional journalism. I was a TV news anchor reporter in 3 American cities: Roanoke, Virginia, Buffalo, New York, and Atlanta, Georgia, and Johannesburg, South Africa for 6.5 years. I spent 13 years in Atlanta, which we called the cradle of the civil rights movement. And in all my time of going to Martin Luther King occasions, I have never once felt inspired to disseminate what was said. And I want you to know that this speech that you gave tonight was so powerful, full of information, full of statistics that we need to know, that we need to have under our belt to inspire us and to inspire other people like us. And I want to make, bless you, bless you. The reason I'm standing up tonight is because I want to offer my services, if you would allow it, and if the organizers of this event would allow it. I would volunteer my services to transcribe this speech so that it could be put in the hands of every student at Portland State University who wants it. And this is the kind of information, the breadth and depth of this information is the kind of information that needs to go to voters around the country. Black, white, colored, Indian, we all need to understand this history. This history is the foundation that we stand on today. And can you imagine, in towns all over the US, if people came to gatherings and heard information like this, if you would go, you'd be powerful. If you won't go, let someone else go.
I think you should deliver
the
it.
Information.
Absolutely.
But, and if the organizers of this event will take me up on my offer, I invite you to reach me through my daughter, Roberta Hunt. Roberta, stand up, please.
Hey, Roberta.
Roberta is in the School of
Social work.
What is it? She's in the Department of Social Work.
This is a family meeting, y'all.
And
it's a family meeting.
I want to do that.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I will take it around.
I typed it if you edit it.
Okay, I'll edit it.
All right.
I'll edit it, but let me have it.
Yes, ma'am.
No, I'm serious.
I'm serious too.
I'm serious.
I'll send it to you after one of the undergraduates checks the references for all the data to make sure I did. Oh, here come on to Uncle Walter.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to interrupt.
I would like to say, you mentioned that are distributed among the students at PSU. We need to distribute it among all the students in the state of Oregon.
Yes, sir.
All over the country.
Yes, ma'am.
All over the country.
And I'll find Roberta.
And Portland State would get credit for it for bringing Rukaiyah Adams to the forefront. We need this information. And if you would tell me who I could follow up with to...
Okay,
well,
so we have a question.
All right, I'll follow up with Roberta.
I'm going to relinquish
you
the
can
mic.
follow up with my mom there, and the whole family will be together. Yes, ma'am.
We have a question here.
Okay, one more question. How about that?
Yes. Who do I give this to?
I really appreciate your remarks, and I think there's such a cross-section of, when we talk about economic or educational equity, it's also economic equity. And the way the economy is going, with being such a tech-based economy, it's an area I've spent a lot of my life on, is helping women and minorities develop the technology skills to be fully able to participate in the 21st century. And one of the things that I notice is there's this big movement where students are going and they're doing these boot camps, these coding boot camps, right? And they spend $15,000 and then they start out at $80,000. But I don't see the data showing that people of color are getting these opportunities. So I think part of the inequality economically is this lack of opportunity to get these tech skills where you can go get jobs like that. And I think as a community, if we were to put our resources together and help minorities and you know, underrepresented people have opportunities to coding camps and these kinds of things, then all of a sudden you'd have a whole cohort of African American kids in technology companies leading out in that. I'm just curious what you think about that.
I agree with that, and I actually think in terms of being able to pivot whole populations toward specific educational training that will drive better economic outcomes. There are some things my people struggle with, but we can pivot, right? We will pivot on you fast. So unlike some communities that have many generations queued up, headed towards, say, Wall Street or some other thing where it might take 4 or 5 generations for the education institutions to transform, to start to produce different skill sets for the workforce. We could pick up and pivot in a few years. So I'm actually optimistic. The things that have prevented us from commanding higher wages and then as a result having more wealth, I think with leaders like the ones we have now in Portland, we actually could transform our wealth base with education relatively quickly. Again, we have to view education as a commonwealth, right? If it's always personal and private, then the cost is always borne by that person who's already in a disadvantaged position. Right. I can't pay $15,000 for it, right? So yes, that's true, but I'm optimistic that we have these huge populations of high school educated black folks in the country that I think will be able to pivot faster than some of, frankly, Boston, for example, where you have generations of kids queued up to go to Boston College or Boston University, and they think they'll be stockbrokers, and the whole investment world is transforming. So yeah, it feels like it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. All education is worthy. But I will put out there, right, this is where I veer off of that point of view, and that I believe the liberal arts are worth it even if the immediate monetary benefit doesn't pay off, and let me tell you why. So, as we try to wrestle with how equity and equality, where the rubber meets the road in our economy and how we divvy up the pie, well, the leading voice in that is Elizabeth Alexander. She's a philosopher. She ain't coding nothing, right? But her thoughts, her clarity can organize billions of dollars of capital in a different way. And so I think getting ourselves out of the inequities based on education will take poets, it's going to take philosophers, it's going to take, right? Now, do I want more of us to be computer scientists? Absolutely. Absolutely. But I do think that all of those skills, that education in itself and being able to think clearly is worth it. It's a worthy enterprise. And that's another reason why I think education has to be thought of as a common good, that scholarship is worth it to society, right? Broad scholarship is worth it to society. And that's, I think, an unfashionable way to think about education. I don't want the professors here to be in an ivory tower. I want them to be thinking and writing and teaching and transforming. But I want some people doing that because my day-to-day work is transactional. I don't have time to be thinking deeply about what equality is, whether it's redistributive or relative. I need Elizabeth Alexander, the philosopher, to help me find my way with the $100 billion that I control, right? I need her to help me. So I think that we need both. Maybe the proportions are off, but. Mm-hmm.
However, to be able to engage in the 21st century
yeah.
economy, I think if we haven't created pedagogy and opportunities and ways of thinking that create space for an African American kid to succeed in technology,
yeah.
then I think we fail.
No, I agree. But to that end, my husband often says we should all take computer science then, right? Not just the kids.
I'm sorry, we're over here. We have 2 questions from our Facebook Live real quick.
Okay.
And then we have a gift for you.
Wonderful.
Okay.
All right, this is super short. First one, what are 2 books you would recommend to students who want to learn more?
Jeopardy, 30 seconds.
So I'm reading a book right now called The Entrepreneurial State by Elizabeth Mazzucato. And it talks about how the state can foster innovation and how innovation is a common good. It's a commonwealth. That's an interesting book, number 1. Number 2, in doing the research for this talk, I went back to my college edition of Testament of Hope, which is the compilation of Dr. King's speeches, his writing. It's hundreds and hundreds of pages, but it was wonderful to go back to dog-eared pages to see what I thought was important at 19. So I think every American should have Dr. King's compilation in their library, and I think they should read it.
Cool. Thank you. And the second question is, would you consider your next career move to run for governor of Oregon?
I mean, looks like you already have a campaign.
I'm going to stick to money for now. But.
Great, you're already moving to the stage, so
okay.
keep going. Okay.
All right, I'll keep
going. So
going.
then, for the rest of you that are still here, please help me welcome to the stage Judy Blue Horace Skelton, faculty member in Indigenous Nations and Studies.
Thank you so much. We're thankful to you, Rukaiyah, for all your sharing, all you're doing in the community and in the world. So much of what you said. So much of what you've shared tonight resonates with all of us. I really appreciate you recognizing Indigenous people. As many have shared, what nation wouldn't concentrate great wealth amongst a few on the backs of genocide, free land, and slavery? So very powerful what you shared, and I'm just grateful to all the work you're doing. And on behalf of PSU, we're going to lay this down, as is the custom. Oh, Uncle Walter, I asked him to stay close. Would you please join us up on the stage, please? As is the custom, at least I think everywhere, but in the Native community, we want to honor our veterans and all your service in the military. And if you would join your niece here, and we would like to wrap you both in the Pendleton blanket.